Intelligence? I mean, what information or intelligence did the U.S. Treasury Department have when they wrote what was released in today's sanction that you did not have as a Mueller team investigator?
Well, the one thing that it's clear, as you've reported, Nicole, is we did not have the piece that is what Kilimnik did with the polling data that we now know from the release today actually went, as Clint said, directly to Russian intelligence. The interesting question that I don't know the answer to is, was that information known to the intelligence community at the time of the Mueller investigation? You know, my sort of educated speculation on that would be it would seem like it would have to have been known because the Biden administration has only been operational for, I'm in New York, so I'll say a New York minute. So it seems unlikely that they really went ahead with that deep an investigation and got the information that quickly. So the question is sort of why didn't it get to the special counsel investigation? And, you know, I spearheaded the Manafort part of that investigation. I can tell you interest, and we tried to turn up this link. And I would just say a good analogy of this is Watergate. You know, in Watergate, you know, you had the Republicans breaking into the Democratic Party because you want to know what your opponent's doing. Well, now we have the complete link of we have Russia knowing exactly what the Trump campaign polling information was and what they were seeing as strengths and weaknesses of their own and of Hillary Clinton. So they could use that to, as Clinton said, target what they were doing in both the hack and dump and also the influence campaign in terms of what states were vulnerable or not. One final piece is it's important to note that this is in the Mueller report, which is that Paul Manafort was conveying to swing states, including places like Wisconsin. And that's something that was not generally well known. And so now we know that Kilimnik was relaying all of that information back to the GRU in Russia.
Well, and Donald Trump was carrying out his end of the bargain as well. Jonathan Lemire, let me show you some of the love he gave Vladimir Putin.
Putin's a killer. A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him. I've already said he is really very much of a leader. I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
So, Jonathan Lemire, these comments sort of bordered on, you know, uninformed to puzzling to, you know, maybe defiant and dismissive of his intelligence community. Certainly what you got from him in Helsinki falls in that category. But now, in light of the fact that a circle had been completed between not some lackey on his campaign, not some coffee boy, but his campaign chairman, who gave the most sensitive campaign data to Konstantin Kilimnik, who then gave it to Russian intelligence, it certainly casts all of Trump's flattery and loyalty and public servitude to Vladimir Putin in a new light.
Precisely right. And that has always been the question here, right, Nicole, as to what really motivated President Trump with his adoration, let's use that word, of Vladimir Putin. And look, we know some of it can be ascribed to the fact that Trump is always drawn to strong men, not just Putin, but others around the globe as well. But it always ran deeper than that with Putin. It ran, you know, to the point where it sort of defined American foreign policy. And there were certainly some levels of the government that did issue sanctions on the Russians, the Senate, and it was a rare moment where they rebuked President Trump, the Republican-controlled Senate, when they also took measures against Russia. But that tone was never set from the top, and we know that you know there was never the Trump. Not only denied it in Helsinki when he sided with Putin over U.S. intelligence, but later he repeatedly did. And when he warned Putin and said, well, don't ever do it again, at a summit the following year, when he refused to confront him on things like the reports of possible bounties on American soldiers. So, you know, and there's certainly been exhaustive investigations into potential financial links, you know, other measures, talk of compromise that involve Trump and the Russians. But certainly now, with this new information, it does raise more questions. What exactly was the other end of the deal here? What favor, perhaps, was Trump trying to repay with all that flattery of Putin and the friendly American policy towards him?
Well, I wonder, too, I mean, Clint Watts, I want to read something you wrote, because it's clear that the Russians got their end of the deal. I mean, you wrote this back in 2018. In Trump and his campaign, Mr. Putin spotted a golden opportunity, an easily ingratiated celebrity motivated by fame and fortune, a foreign policy novice surrounded by unscreened opportunists open to manipulation and unaware of Russia's long-run game of subversion. Mr. Putin has succeeded where his Soviet forefathers failed, by leveraging money and cyberspace to subtly infiltrate and influence Americans while maintaining plausible deniability of their efforts. And the Kremlin's ground game cutouts, intermediaries who facilitated communication between agents, conducted a more complex game. Does this make Trump and Manafort the useful idiots, or does it make them something worse? Were they complicit?
I actually see the two of them as being a little bit different. I think Manafort absolutely knew what he was doing and had reason. He had motive to essentially build out that relationship. My understanding of it is that he was financially in trouble. And in a lot of the messages that came out in the Mueller investigation, you saw him talk about, how does this make us whole? How does this patch up relationships? Because he was in deep trouble in Ukraine. It had not gone well. I think for President Trump, from the very start, it was impossible for him to be the Manchurian candidate because, quite frankly, he's just too lazy. And he did not understand what was going on between the United States and Russia or what Putin was trying to do. I don't believe the president really had a full understanding of how Putin can manipulate people, how he can ingratiate them, and how he can actually start to turn them, which is the whole idea of active measures, was to turn President Trump into someone who is a fan, essentially, of Russian foreign policy. And so he's very influential, in that space because he knows how to play to ego, money, fame. And when you do that, especially with somebody like President Trump, who just wants to see his name in the papers, who just wants to be ingratiated, well, that's a pretty easy mark for a former KGB intelligence officer. So when you look at this entire strategy, it's really about influence and how you do that influence. And I think they cannot believe to this day what a coup they pulled off in terms of the information space and the influence in the U.S. during the Trump years. And I think what we're seeing now, that's also going to be a very rocky and really interesting period in the next couple months, is the standoff between U.S. and Russia, which was bound to happen at some point after the Trump administration.
So, Andrew, Clint used the word coup, so I'm going to go there. Do you think we will ever know if Trump could have won without Putin's help?
No, we won't know that. I don't think that's really actually knowable, because I don't think you can really have any individual will be able to say, I'm not really sure why I voted this way or that way. But in terms of the systemic issue, it's really important that none of us ever have to ask that question again. And I do think what happened today is something that we should really expect to see more of. We now have a rule of law administration that now has access to the data that was available to the Trump administration. And so this is a huge bombshell today in terms of information. But I would expect to see more. Because they now have access to information that was, I think, probably deliberately withheld.
Do you think, Andrew Weissman, that this opens an investigative path? I mean, do you have more questions as someone, as you said, who spearheaded the Manafort investigation, or does this kind of answer that which was left unanswered?
I think there is more to know, and there are places in our report where we signaled things that were left unanswered. I think from an intelligence perspective, you could be sure that the DNI is going to want to pursue this. And as you're seeing today, there are ramifications in terms of foreign policy. So I'm not sure I would say that you're going to necessarily see a criminal investigation, but I am confident that you're going to see this pursued as a national security investigation. And just the one big question I have, which I do think deserves an answer, is who had this information during the Trump administration, and why wasn't it conveyed to the special counsel's office? I do think that is an important